I never thought I'd say this, but even CNN just aired one of the most brutally honest takes on Hamas that I have ever seen. No spin, no sugarcoating, just the raw truth, and you won't believe what was actually said on air. This changes everything.
Ceasefire in Gaza in tatters right now after deadly Israeli airstrikes overnight. I want to get some analysis and some reaction from President Trump's former national security advisor, retired Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster. He's the author of the new book, At War with Ourselves, My Tour of Duty in the Trump White House. General McMaster, thanks so much for joining us. As you know, Israel says it was forced to carry out these airstrikes after Hamas rejected 2 U.S. proposals to continue the ceasefire and return hostages. Do you believe the Israelis were justified, even if it means the end of this ceasefire?
I do, Wolf, and the reason is just the nature of Hamas. And what we're dealing with is a terrorist organization.
Before these comments even continue, I just want to mention, if you pay attention to Wolf Blitzer's, the way he poses the question, he's posing it as if Israel, quote-unquote, restarting the war is what ended the ceasefire. That's not what ended the ceasefire. What ended the ceasefire is the fact that Hamas is absolutely unwilling to negotiate like decent human beings.
Organization that has inflicted tremendous pain and loss on Israel, but also on the Palestinian population in Gaza. I think it's really important that we not allow Hamas to offload responsibility for this war on anybody else. And it's important to remember that they're still holding 59 hostages. If anybody still had doubts about the nature of the organization, just look at the way that they have used these hostage releases to continue to torture the Israeli people. And I think what we have to recognize is they continue to try to evade the Israeli Defense Force by using the Palestinian population as human shields. I mean, the sad truth is, Wolf, that the only thing that Israel can do to assure its security is to destroy that organization. And, you know, the sad part is there aren't options for the civilian population to evacuate. I can't think of any other example of a war in which the population was denied the ability to move out. You might remember, you know, in the Syrian civil war, you know, that I think you could argue is still going on, but that Syrian civil war, half the population was dead, wounded, or displaced. Many more would have been killed if the population had been penned into cities like Aleppo. So, you know, it's a very sad situation all the way around, but I don't see how Israel had any other option.
He brings up some very important points. First is responsibility, that we shouldn't be putting the responsibility on anyone other than Hamas. Now, we're not expecting Hamas to become a responsible group of people. They're completely irresponsible. It's actually not possible to get them to be responsible because their only responsibility lies in death. That's what they hold themselves to. And that's the issue that he mentions. That's why Israel really has no other options other than to actually decimate Hamas entirely. The next point he makes is that this is such an unusual situation where the local population of citizens have nowhere to go. Why don't they have anywhere to go? Because no one in the world is willing to help them, including, and first and foremost, the ones who should be helping them, their neighbor, their bordering neighbor, which is Egypt, as well as Jordan, where they originate from, as well as all of the other 20 plus Arab nations, where they have plenty of place for them, but no one wants, they're deliberately holding them in, and this is what is making this problem a perpetual issue.
The Israelis say, and the U.S. agrees, that Israel formally, officially notified the Trump administration just ahead of the planned attack. How would you recommend that President Trump handle the renewed fighting that's going on right now?
Well, I think the way to handle it is kind of what he did in his first administration, which is to act like he knows what the return address is. And this is what the Trump administration is doing that the Biden administration was really reluctant to do. I mean, Iran has caused so much pain, so much suffering across the region for Israelis, for Palestinians, for the Syrian population, for the Yemeni population. And these recent strikes against the Houthis, I think, were long overdue. You know, these just reprisal attacks weren't adequate to security in the Bab el-Mandeb, you know, that shipping route that's so critical. But also it's important to remember the Houthis have inflicted tremendous suffering on the Yemeni people, besieging and starving people to death. So I think the next step is going to be, what happens with Iran? And I think, of course, financial actions, economic actions are appropriate. Interdiction of Iran's efforts to reinforce its axis of terrorists and organizations and militias in the region. And then ultimately, of course, what we ought to be talking about is what happens with Iran's nuclear program, and what I think is probably like a 98% chance for their own security.
Well, you think the Israelis would strike the Iran nuclear program as opposed to the United States doing that?
You see, you notice that he's making sure to discuss this problem not as an isolated Israel problem, but as a regional problem, as it actually is. And that you can't resolve an issue unless you get to the roots of the problem. And the roots of the problem actually stem from Iran and stem from all of the other proxies which are attacking Israel. We can't just deal with Israel and Hamas without resolving the full, broader issue.
Well, you think the Israelis would strike the Iran nuclear program as opposed to the United States doing that?
Well, I think it remains to be seen if the United States would join in a military operation to block Iran's path to the most destructive weapons on earth. And it's important to remember that the reason why a military option is important to have is because this is an Iranian regime that wants to destroy Israel and kill all the Jews, and the Begin doctrine, which has been Israel's doctrine, since really the age of nuclear proliferation, has been that Israel cannot conscience a hostile state having the most destructive weapons on earth, and they've acted on that twice. Remember, in Iraq and in Syria in 2007, and so. I think this is a much more complicated operation, certainly, but it's important to remember in the last strikes that Israel conducted on Iran, they flew 140 aircraft into Iran, destroyed Iran's air defense systems, essentially flew laps around Tehran, and I think, Wolf, I think struck a lot of those nuclear sites already because so many of those nuclear sites are undeclared. So, I think that Israel's already demonstrated the ability to conduct strikes, but of course, doing that with the United States would be a lot more effective. Can Iran escape that? Donald Trump has offered them an opportunity to escape it through negotiating a settlement that would have them stop the enrichment of uranium, right? I mean, there are a lot of countries that have nuclear power, that don't enrich uranium. That could be an option for Iran. But of course, you've heard Ayatollah Khamenei's, the theocratic dictator in Iran, dismiss that out of hand. So I think we're on a path to a conflict involving an effort to block Iran's path to the most destructive weapons on earth.
Yeah, this tension in the Middle East could really explode big time in the coming weeks and months. There's no doubt about that.
He asked the question of who's going to be the one to attack Iran. That's a great question. Practically, if with the focus of decimating Iran's nuclear power, does it really make a difference who it is? I mean, ultimately, it's going to come down to what's diplomatically strategic, politically strategic, probably, and that's going to determine whether the United States wants Israel to do it or not. And I suspect, if I had to guess, that Israel would be doing the majority of it, and they'll be backed up by America, either in a background that no one's going to see, or even with some direct assistance from the United States. I suspect that after the negotiations between America and Iran, which I hope is not going to make progress and will reveal who Iran is, that the United States will be upset enough to be willing to actually put their name openly on the attack against Iran. That's going to make it a lot easier for Israel, of course.
General McMaster, thanks very much. I want to continue my conversation with you right after a short break. There's other news we need to follow up on.
Yeah, so this is very, very good interview and very important comments that are being shared here.